Guys, I must tell you, this Askren Paul business has gotten so far out of hand in comparison to where I thought that this would go. Paul has proven through his boxing matches that he has a base that is willing to come with him. He's proven that. He's a draw. But we've never known how big of a draw. Even in his last fight where he fought this Robinson, those numbers did great, but you had Tyson and Roy Jones on the bill. So then you just don't know. You don't know, can somebody that wasn't a main event carry a card by themselves? Were people here for Paul? Were they here because it was Iron Mike coming back? Right, it's just a guess. But we can recognize that Paul did good. And Paul had done well in his other matches. Now, let me tell you where I'm coming from. I'm looking forward to this. I'm counting down the days. But I got a YouTube channel. Your YouTube views are not only audited, they're publicly audited. I will know any big fight. I can test any big fight. I am part of the algorithm that the UFC and Bellator use to equate what they're going to have in terms of a big fight. I will bring it to you guys. You guys will let us know, is that something you want to see? And it's not just through the comment sections or the likes or the dislikes, it's straight up views. We have champions within these organizations you will never hear me talk about. Why? Because I've already spoke about them and it bombed. Nobody cared. I mean, it's just one of these things. So it's a great place to start. Really great place. Just go to YouTube with a topic. See how many people cared. I test this with Submission Underground all the time. And you guys let me know in your own little way which direction you want me to pursue or stop. Come up with a new idea. I only bring this to you because the numbers and attention coming in for Askren versus Paul, they're exponentially higher than what I would have guessed. And I started on this fight in a pretty good place. I was in a pretty good place of interest and had a pretty good handle for your guys' interest level. It's much greater than that. Much greater. I can't seem to talk about Askren and Paul enough and talk to them about them in enough different ways that quits being compelling because there's so many questions about this match. This is very hard to sit down and debate with somebody and you, boom, here's your argument versus their argument. We haven't seen enough of them. We have not seen enough of Jake Paul. Some of the greater things that we've got from Jake Paul comes from the training room, comes from some of the footage, comes from the hours he's putting in, the sweat that he has, the time of day, who he's going with. Ben Askren's never boxed. So we've seen Ben compete and we've seen Ben even fight. We've seen Ben train, but we don't know enough, right? That question still exists. I watched Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith was given a breakdown with Mike Swick. Swick was the host and Swick asked Anthony what he thought. And Anthony goes, I really thought that it was going to be Paul. When this fight first started, even Askren, this is Anthony talking, even Ben Askren himself will tell you he's not Mr. Hands. He's not Mr. Boxer. And he said, and I could see that Jake was working hard. I know that Jake isn't very good at boxing, but he is getting better and he's working hard. And I was leaning towards Jake, but Anthony changed his mind. He changed his mind based on solely the press conference. Now, what can you get from a press conference? What the hell's Lionheart talking about here? How could you think one guy was going to beat another guy under Queensberry's rules, and with them both sitting on their ass holding a microphone, come to another conclusion? Well, Anthony gave the answer, and here's what he said. He said Paul was just so out of his sorts. He was out of his element. He was genuinely intimidated. He had a genuine fear within his responses. And by the way, I'm adding to what Anthony, I'm taking what Anthony said, I'm adding a little bit to it. I don't want you to think I'm quoting him perfectly, but he was talking about Jake Paul is now face-to-face with a guy he's been talking about and a guy he's about to fight. He has a reasonable belief that Ben's going to stay in that chair and he's going to stay in his chair, but there is nobody in between them, and he doesn't know with all certainty that this isn't going to jump off. And you could see that within his tone and his demeanor. And it is very important to try to get into the mind of a fighter. It's very important. Because you can't make an argument that they don't make for themselves. You cannot come out and say that Paul is better and Paul is going to dominate if Paul himself doesn't believe that. So that's where it gets tough, and that's where these press conferences come in handy. And it was very accurate what Anthony Smith was saying. Paul did not want to go too far. He wanted to insult Ben. He wanted to get the quirks in there, but it is just him and Ben, and there's nobody in between, and there's cameras rolling, and he's got this whole reputation on the line. He also is trying to keep Ben in a box. He was trying to make sure he got his lines in, but nothing for this guy to come across the cage. Swick then weighed in on it, and Swick said, Anthony, I'm not a street fight guy. I don't get into that stuff, and I don't really know how I would react if somebody pie-faced me like Ben did to Jake. He goes, but I can tell you that I wouldn't slap him on the ass. I don't know what my response would be, but it would not be to pat him on the butt. And I thought Swick made it. That was kind of interesting, too, because I didn't get as much from it. I didn't get as much from that press conference as these guys did. I've never gotten much out of a press conference in general, aside from entertainment. I've been greatly entertained. I did realize through the buildup of Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather, okay, Conor's serious. Conor thinks he can beat this guy. I did gather that. 4 press conferences, hour apiece, 4 hours of this. Conor wanted to fight Floyd. It wasn't an act, and believed that he could beat him. Now, I recognize that doesn't equate to a victory, but that math and logic in reverse 100% equates to a loss. All right, a guy being confident, a guy wanting to do it, and a guy believing in his preparation and his coaches and his skills and his hard work will not always take him to victory. But a guy who questions his coaching, who questions his work, who questions his sacrifice, for sure will result in loss. So when Anthony was breaking this down with Swick, I gotta tell you, I left with a different feeling, because Anthony is right. And Anthony's also telling you the mind of a fighter, because he's been in those spots. Anthony Smith's fought for world championships, fought in a number of main events, fought in a number of co-main events, fought a number of world champions. It's one of these things where Anthony's been at press conferences, and he knows that energy that he feels. He knows when he's getting to somebody, but he's also admitting to you when somebody's gotten to him. So it's very compelling to hear a fighter like Anthony Smith start breaking down a press conference between 2 fighters. And you know what? I have the same conclusion that Anthony. And I may not have had those opinions if he hadn't said them. I'm stealing them from him. I'm parroting what he said. But look, part of being good at what you do is to be able to recognize, and identify when something's right. Anthony's making a good point, and he's right. And so Swick. I don't know what I would do if a guy pie-faced me either. I do know what I wouldn't do. In all fairness, I do know what I wouldn't do. So now you're left at a question of why. Why was that the reaction? Was that the reaction because he was a gentleman? Is that a reaction because he was sportive? Is it a reaction because this isn't sanctioned and I don't get into this stuff? I don't tend to think so, because I watched Paul legally assault Dylan Dennis. So I don't buy into he's a gentleman. I don't buy into he's a sportsman. I watched him commit a crime and drive away as Dylan was coming from him. So with that in mind, the question does come back to, why did Paul behave that way? Why was that his response? And what is it within himself that he's questioning? And perhaps it could have been just a different rule set. Right, I mean, if they get into some kind of guerrilla antics, it's anything goes until somebody steps in and breaks it up, which is going to take you anywhere from 8 to 20 seconds at a maximum. However, that's not the Queensberry rules, and I can also use the equation back to Conor and Floyd. Do you guys know why Dana White was every single place Conor went if Floyd was there? Do you think it was so Dana could get his own face out there? Or so that Dana could say something? No, it wasn't. It was written in the contract. Dana White was the security. They wrote it into a contract. Literally, Conor McGregor touches Floyd Mayweather, this deal is off. Literally. Not if we fight, not if he takes me down, not if he kicks at me. If Conor touches Floyd, everything's off. They put it in a legal contract. Dana, to make sure that clause of the contract stayed intact, went everywhere. That's why Dana was there, just to bring that to you. And now that I've armed you with that, go back and watch, because there was a great moment. Conor walks behind Floyd. Now, you never let somebody behind you, ever. Never. You find yourself in a fight, the first thing you do is put your back up against a wall. Make sure you at least know where it's coming from. Floyd allowed Conor to walk behind him. It was very interesting, and Floyd was sitting there very calm. But I know that Floyd agrees with me. You don't ever let the enemy behind you. But Floyd did let him behind. And when Conor was behind him, Conor actually patted Floyd on the head. He just patted his head. He just petted, real gentle. Floyd did nothing. Conor did nothing and walked away. Go back and rewatch that and watch Dana White's face. Because Conor just broke the deal. I mean, they could have called that whole fight off. The Zuffa boxing, everybody, it would have been gone. They could have. I realize I'm being silly. Who's going to burn that over somebody touching on their head? But go back and watch Dana's face, and you will know why and how serious this was, and you'll understand why Dana was there. But if you juxtapose that against Paul's reaction to Askren, where that isn't written down, that isn't a deal, I think I can beat you, but specifically under one rule set, of which isn't followed should we jump off here on the stage. It is one of those things. It is one of those things. I'm asking because why was Paul questioning? And I might have just given him the answer. Because Paul, in no make-believe land, thinks he can beat up Ben Askren. However, in a certain make-believe land, suspending reality just far enough, does he believe he can beat him with the Queensberry rule sets? That's ultimately the big question. And I think that question is now getting called to the floor. Does Paul really think he can beat Askren? Because a number of people and a number of you are saying that he can. That's between those boys. Me shouting over here doesn't make me right. That's between those boys. But what I'm asking you is, do you believe something that Jake Paul doesn't?